5. Nietzsche. In Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche, 1844 to 1900, philosophy very definitely abandoned the clouds of the beyond for the practical considerations of the present, and for 11 years of insanity, Nietzsche observed, "As I have written, if there were gods, how could I endure it to be not God? Therefore, there are no gods." Nietzsche was here quoting a fundamental sentence and concept from Thus Spake Zarathustra. In that work he went on to say, what would there be to create if there were gods? The point is an important one. It is not the truth about God that matters, but simply that Nietzsche cannot tolerate the God concept unless he himself is God. Even more than Marx, Nietzsche has no use for reason and logic. Why ascribe meaning and truth to reason and logic, and thereby establish a new beyond over man? Accordingly, Nietzsche, to express bluntly his break with traditional religion and philosophy, affirmed the pragmatic value and utility of what was regarded as a lie or as falseness. The falseness of an opinion is not for us any objection to it. It is here, perhaps, that our new language sounds most strangely. The question is, how far an opinion is life-furthering, life-preserving, species-preserving, perhaps species-rearing? And we are fundamentally inclined to maintain that the falsest opinions, to which the synthetic judgment a priori belong, are the most indispensable to us. That without a recognition of logical fictions, without a comparison of reality with the purely imagined world of the absolute and immutable, without a constant counterfeiting of the world by means of numbers, man could not live. That the renunciation of false opinions would be a renunciation of life, a negation of life. To recognize untruth as a condition of life, that is certainly to impugn the traditional ideas of value in a dangerous manner, and a philosophy which ventures to do so has thereby alone placed itself beyond good and evil. Truth is thus irrelevant. More than that, it's a nuisance in that man needs a lie to live and to realize himself as God. To live, this is the goal, and to live without God means to will to be God. Thus, the life force is the will to power, the will to be Superman, more to be God. As Foster, in his admiring study of Nietzsche, recognized, Nietzsche's Zarathustra is hard, egoistical, knowing neither love nor justice. He knows but one law, and that law is his own law, the law of his own force, the law which is at once its own sanction and its own delimitation. Ostensibly now the beyond is abolished and God is dead. Man is freed from truth and can be himself, without regard to either the absolute of truth or the new absolute of history. But no, Nietzsche has introduced another beyond, a most ruthless one who promises only destruction to man. I teach you the Superman. Man is something that is to be surpassed. What have ye done to surpass man? A choice is given to men. Would they rather go back to the beast than surpass man? Nietzsche was thus the prophet of a new order, or, as his friend Lou Andreas Salome stated it in her diary, the prophet of a new religion. If man must be surpassed, then man has a hard and ruthless beyond breathing down his neck and decreeing his destruction. But what ground was there for this belief? Nietzsche had followed the Hegelians in outlawing truth, reason, and the beyond. He himself wrote with respect to the starting point of epistemology, the hypothesis that at bottom things proceed in such a normal fashion that human reason must be right is a mere piece of good-natured and simple-minded trustfulness, the result of the belief in divine truthfulness. God regarded as the creator of all things, these concepts are our inheritance from a former existence in a beyond. In such a case, what's beyond makes Nietzsche's opinions right. If everything is beyond good and evil, beyond truth and untruth, what criterion of judgment is left? Nietzsche wrote, "The value of life. Every life stands by itself. All existence must be justified, and not only life, the justifying principle, must be one through which life itself speaks. Life is only a means to something. It is the expression of the forms of growth and power. Clearly, a beyond is governing life, but it is an illegitimate beyond. There is no ground left for assuming that life is better than death, or that the life of tomorrow, Superman, is better than the life and man of today." Nietzsche admitted that the conscious world cannot be a starting point for valuing, an objective valuation is necessary. Nietzsche is here sneaking in a disguised God and a veiled beyond. In fact, he denies that man or man's consciousness can be normative, or that happiness, intellectuality, or morality, or any other individual sphere of consciousness can be the highest value. If we wish to postulate an adequate object of life, it would not necessarily be related in any way with the category of conscious life. It would require rather to explain conscious life as a mere means to itself. The denial of life regarded as the object of life, the object of evolution, existence, a piece of tremendous stupidity. Any such mad interpretation is only the outcome of life's being measured by the factors of consciousness, pleasure and pain, good and evil. Here the means are made to stand against the end, the unholy, absurd and, above all, disagreeable means. How can the end be any use when it requires such means? But where the fault lies is here. Instead of looking for the end which would explain the necessity of such means, we posited an end from the start which actually excludes such means. That is, we made a desideratum in regard to certain means, especially pleasurable, rational, and virtuous, into a rule, and then only did we decide what end would be desirable. Where the fundamental fault lies is in the fact that, instead of regarding consciousness as an instrument and an isolated phenomenon of life in general, we made it a standard, the highest value in life. It is the faulty standpoint of a parte ad totum, and that is why all philosophers are instinctively seeking at the present day for a collective consciousness, a thing that lives and wills consciously. With all that happens, a spirit, a God. But they must be told that it is precisely thus that life is converted into a monster, that a God and a general sensorium would necessarily be something on whose account the whole of existence would have to be condemned. Our greatest relief came when we eliminated the general consciousness which postulates ends and means. In this way, we ceased from being necessarily pessimists. Our greatest indictment of life was the existence of God. In this passage, Nietzsche flails at the opposition every time his own bankruptcy becomes apparent. He needs a criterion, but he will not, of course, accept God. He denies the individual consciousness, and he also denies the collective consciousness. He wants to avoid creating a God as judge over man, but he cannot accept any criterion from individual or collective man. The criterion is thus not in man, nor beyond man, nor in God. Nietzsche, moreover, denies the concept of being in favour of becoming, but a becoming which is eternal process, never reaching a final state. I should like to have a concept of the world which does justice to this fact. Becoming ought to be explained without having recourse to such final designs. Becoming must appear justified at every instant, or it must defy all valuation, which has unity as its end. The present must not under any circumstances be justified by a future, nor must the past be justified for the sake of the present. Necessity must not be interpreted in the form of a prevailing and ruling collective force, or as a prime mover. and still less as the necessary cause of some valuable result. But to this end, it is necessary to deny a collective consciousness for becoming a God, in order that life may not be veiled under the shadow of a being who feels and knows as we do, and yet wills nothing. God is useless if he wants nothing, and if he does want something, this presupposes a general sum of suffering and irrationality which lowers the general value of becoming. Fortunately, any such general power is lacking. A suffering God overlooking everything, a general sensorium and ubiquitous spirit, would be the greatest indictment of existence. Strictly speaking, nothing of the nature of being must be allowed to remain, because, in that case, becoming loses its value and gets to be sheer and superfluous nonsense. Neither thought nor existence has value or meaning. Indeed, nothing does. Nietzsche, in The Will to Power, was both affirming nihilism and trying vainly to transcend it. He affirmed a cyclical view of history, an eternal recurrence, as he did extensively in Thus Spake Zarathustra, as the alternative to God's meaning and eternal decree. But this eternal recurrence is a blind, destroying monster, although Nietzsche tried to give it meaning. In the concluding words of The Will to Power, Nietzsche admitted his inability to find meaning. He could only describe. This world, do you want a name for this world? A solution for all its riddles? This world is the will to power and nothing more. And you yourself are this will to power and nothing more. Van Rijchen comments, that this will is not free, that this infinity of circular processes is a speculation, that it is difficult to see how man, driven by these processes, can ever move forward, or how he can desire such processes. All this only emphasizes that nihilism, no matter what motif it takes up to save itself, can end only in a decadent ruin. But the most important thing is that Nietzsche did find in his last motif a cultural principle which would be followed in actual practice. He expected that it would bring victory over decadence and passive nihilism. We have seen this victory in our present century. It is the worship of power, the valueless activism, always restless, driven by the fear of meaninglessness, and finally pouring itself out in annihilation and self-annihilation. Nietzsche saw the consequences of his ideas. He regarded himself as a man of destiny whose works would shake and rearrange the world. All the mighty forms of the old society are blown into space, for they all rest on falsehood. There will be wars whose like have never been seen on earth before. Politics on a grand scale will date from me. Van Rijchen's comment is very much to the point when he observes that when Nietzsche comes to the root of the question, he knows that he must choose between Jesus and himself, and then he becomes the prophet of the Antichrist. Then he wants to become the Antichrist himself. He applies ecce homo, behold a man, to himself. It would thus appear as if Nietzsche concerned himself only with Jesus, while he parodied him and sought his opposite. Still, Nietzsche was in fact nothing else than a parasite feeding on the gospel. Brom has rightly remarked that Zarathustra would be unthinkable without the Bible. The framework, the use of language, the comparisons, the didactic questions, the walks, the search for solitude, the frequent use of texts, literally paraphrased or transposed, all these things which help make of Zarathustra the opponent of the gospel are borrowed from that same gospel. Nietzsche demolished everything so that he would not have to capitulate, and when he set about building, he could build nothing new, nothing else than a heterogeneous mixture of that which Jesus had been and the negation thereof. Guide says, and with good grounds, that Nietzsche can never be understood without considering his jealousy of the gospel. Thus, Nietzsche, who sought to create a new religion, could only ape the old one. Instead of a brave new world, he ended with none at all. There was no meaning left in his world, no one, no many, only negation and nihilism. He'd tried to affirm life, but he ended by affirming nihilism and death. He claimed to hate God in the name of man, but he waged war against man also in the name of the Superman. A system which denies God will then deny man. No God, no man. The boastful Nietzsche, who spoke of the need of taking a whip to women, was humbled even in his prime. Lou Salome harnessed Paul Rie and Nietzsche to a cart, sat in it with a whip, and had the scene photographed. There was thus no Superman either. Indeed, there was scarcely a man. In Nietzsche's own honest but self-pitying words, "What I tried to do was to stand on my own shoulders, to superimpose nature upon nature, denying a creator God, insisting that the world lives on itself, feeds on its own excrement, as I say somewhere among my notes. Where did Titanism of defiance lead me? To the same pit as Schopenhauer's Titanism of denial, to moral and spiritual exhaustion, to the nothingness of the abyss." Levi's description of Nietzsche's will to illusion, which he exalts almost into a metaphysical instance, is most telling. Levi sees this will to illusion as a strand in modern thought, citing Otto Rank, the Freudian, as an example of the same temper. According to Rank, it is to the effect that our seeking the truth in human motives for acting and thinking is destructive. With the truth one cannot live. To be able to live, one needs illusions. The more a man can take reality as truth, appearance as essence, the sounder, the better adjusted, the happier will he be. At the moment when we begin to search after truth, we destroy reality and our relation to it. The appeal of Nietzsche rests on a will to illusion. One of Nietzsche's most revealing passages touches on the reason for the murder of God. But he had to die. He looked with eyes which beheld everything. He beheld men's depths and dregs, all his hidden ignominy and ugliness. His pity knew no modesty. He crept into my dirtiest corners. This most prying, over-intrusive, over-pitiful one had to die. He beheld me. On such a witness I would have revenge, or not live myself. The God who beheld everything, and also man, that God had to die, and cannot endure it that such a witness should live. Nietzsche, a pathetic, boastful figure, decreed God's death because he could not bear to have an omnipotent God see into his heart and know his sin and ugliness. By this step Nietzsche doomed himself. There was soon no other side to him than sin and ugliness. Nietzsche had decreed his own death. The death of God was an illusion. The collapse and death of Nietzsche was the reality.